Welcome to the No Shame Podcast. I'm John Groders. And on this podcast, we always find ways to talk with people who are at the intersection of faith and culture. And today we're going to take on the sports culture and talk with Reverend Mark Mitchell, the chaplain of the San Francisco Giants.
Got no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame on the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
All right, let's get started. We'd like to welcome Mark Mitchell today to the No Shame Podcast, the intersection of faith and culture. And I'm so glad, Mark. Tell us where you're calling from today.
I am calling from Foster City, California. So we are on the San Francisco Peninsula, about 10 miles south of the San Francisco International Airport.
Nice. So within striking distance of an awful lot of cool things in the Bay Area.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a very exciting and challenging place to live, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, Mark, will you just start by, I know you got a couple of jobs. Tell us what you do.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I am the lead pastor at Central Peninsula Church here on the peninsula. We are a church with two campuses. One of them, our original campus, is in Foster City, and then we have another campus in Redwood City, just a little bit south of us. And I've served here at CPC for almost 31 years. So, as I like to say, I started when I was 12, but actually that's not true. So that's a big part of what I do, and then the last 3 years, going now into my fourth year, I have served as the chaplain for the San Francisco Giants.
Mm-hmm. 31 years at one church, 3 years at the other.
Yes.
How long does it take for either one of those groups to learn to trust you?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say that that the ministry that I've had with the Giants is definitely a ministry where you have to sort of earn the right to be heard, as we used to say in Young Life ministry.
Great old Young Life, yeah.
You have to, you definitely have to earn their trust, and that just takes time. As you probably well know, a lot of people want to be around ball players for selfish reasons, whether they want to get something from them or they just get some kind of value and meaning from being around them. Baseball players know that. They're not dummies. They're smart guys, and so they're very guarded as a result, and honestly, they probably should be guarded. So ministry-wise, it just takes time, and you've got to show up and be faithful, and you have to be content being a little bit invisible for the first year and a half or so. That's what I discovered. So, in the church ministry, it's a little different. Even though it's true, you still have to earn the right to be heard. When a church hires a pastor, usually there's a certain degree of trust that kind of goes along with that. So it is different. It's more challenging for sure working with professional athletes.
Tell me what you see when you look at our culture and the role sports plays in it today. If you were to visit the ruins of our nation as some Martian from the future, what you'd see of these cathedrals, from coast to coast. How do you articulate the role of sports in American culture?
Gosh, that is a huge question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give a thorough answer to that, but I think on one level, obviously there's a lot of wonderful things about sports, and somehow I think God has wired us in such a way that that we enjoy sport, and it is a way of expressing our humanity. You even see throughout the scriptures, you see numerous athletic metaphors being used, run the race to win, and that sort of thing. I buffet my body. So there's something in us, I think, that loves sports, and that even competition is something that somehow, in some way, has to be part of the image of God within us. Obviously, twisted now after the fall, but there's something good about all of that, I think. But we also know that in our culture in particular, there's a lot of our fallen nature that gets expressed through sport. I mean, you see just the idolatry of sports. Goodness, my son and my son-in-law are Division I college football coaches, and when your team starts to lose, I mean, it's unbelievable the kind of stuff you have to endure from fans. I mean, so there is this crazy kind of idolatry of our teams, of our athletes. There's way too much, in some ways, sort of adulation and respect given just because they're able to shoot 3-point shots, or jump high and catch a touchdown, or hit a ball 500 yards or feet or whatever. So there's way too much respect given, for those things, where obviously the more important things are things like character and so forth. And then I would just say also that, whether we like it or not, sports does provide a significant platform for followers of Christ to have an impact through their sports and through being men and women of great character, and letting that be an opportunity, and, as I said, a platform for sharing their faith.
Interesting how you made some biblical connections. I mean, I'm just thinking as you're talking, I mean, Saul was sort of elected king of Israel because he was tall.
Yeah, that's
he was
right.
probably, like the fittest of a generation. I mean, and David himself, the sport of his day, slayed his thousands, slayed his 10,000s. These guys were given a platform in Old Testament times, I imagine, I'm kind of guessing, partly just because of their physical abilities. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that's actually true. And of course, what could be a God-given ability and gift, and often is, can also be used, for great harm. And I think that's important to keep in mind too, is that ultimately we don't trust in chariots, we don't trust in horses, we trust in the Lord our God. So those are lessons that all those men, Saul and David and Samson, had to learn. I will
just be honest with you. Mark and I are talking over the phone, if you're listening to our podcast today, and we've never met, but I'm intrinsically interested in what Mark does, because I will admit to being a huge sports fan, probably unhealthily so, and I also admit that I really inwardly cheer when some of these great athletes stand up for Christ. I just want them to be, as you just said, using this platform that they have to speak about true things and to model true behavior. And I think, I desire it in an almost inappropriate way more than I look just at people in the community. But having said that, you have access to a team that's won 3 World Series in the last, 8 years. A team who, thankfully, on the last day of the season this year, and I'd just like to put a shout out to Pablo Sandoval for winning that 162nd game this year for the Giants, because that gave the Tigers the number 1 pick in the next year's summer draft.
That's right.
So
there you
thank
go.
you, Pablo.
Are you a Tigers fan?
I'm a Tiger
goodness.
fan from Michigan, so what can I tell you? I can't believe he did that. But tell us about what it's like a little bit. If you can bring us into a room that most of us are never going to see, and that's the clubhouse when you're working and seeing these athletes.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Of course, I should say that I've only been in one team's clubhouse, and that is the San Francisco Giants. So I can't speak about other clubhouses. I've been with other teams in our visiting clubhouse at AT&T Park where the Giants play. But as far as being in our own clubhouse with our own guys, it's only San Francisco Giants that I can speak for. And so, I have the privilege, I believe, of working in an organization that is a very, very high-class, I think even high-integrity organization. I won't mention names here, but, we have a general manager that is a wonderful believer, and we just have a culture of professionalism, I believe, on the Giants that is very exemplary. So, our guys in the clubhouse, there's they get along well. I mean, there's a certain amount of kidding around and having fun and so forth, but I think more importantly, they're very professional about the way they go about their business, and they're there to play. They're there to do their job. I tell you what, I have been really struck deeply by what a difficult job they have. 162 games, not including spring training. It is a true grind, and these guys, the travel schedules are unbelievable. It is so difficult on their bodies and on their families. And, you got to be a tough dude and a tough woman if you're married to a baseball player, but you got to be tough. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a challenge. And so I respect how hard these guys work. We always talk about, well, they make so much money, who wouldn't want to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, yeah, some of them make so much money. Not all of them do, really. But, they work so hard, and it's so hard on their bodies, and a lot is asked of them. So I have a ton of respect for these guys, and, they're in the clubhouse, they're at work. When I'm there on Sundays, I have to be very careful. I want to respect that this is their place of work. I'm at their place of work. I'm a guest there, and so I'm very careful about not intruding really on what is an important period of time for them in pregame and so forth. So I'm careful. I'm cautious. I try to be as professional as they are, I guess, is the way I would say it.
So, Mark, what's it go like? I mean, I don't know if you said Sundays. So what's the job of the chaplain like, and what opportunities do you have, and what do you do?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm responsible to be at the ballpark on Sunday home games. And there are 13 Sunday home games, so that does not include spring training. So on Sunday home games, I arrive at the park about 9:15, and what I do is I establish a contact with the visiting team player representative for chapel, and we determine the time for the visiting team's chapel. Usually it's at about 10:30 a.m. for a 105 game. And then I establish the time for the home team chapel as well, which is usually at about 11:30 for a 105 game. So I do a 20-minute chapel for the visiting team, which is usually a message from the Bible and a time of prayer. And then I do a chapel for the home team, as I said, at 11:30. Again, 20 minutes, message, same message as the visiting team received, and a short time of prayer. And then at about noon, I go over and I do a chapel for the umpires.
Wow.
Always asking the umpires, there's only 4 umpires, as you probably know, so I always ask the umpires before I do anything if they want a chapel. And and usually they do, so I go in and I do a short chapel for them, usually shorter than I do for the players and the visiting team and home team. And then after that, and this is unique, I think, to San Francisco, is that my wife and I, who was with me, not that whole time, but she joins me for a final chapel, a 4th chapel, which usually takes place at about 12:40 for the wives and the girlfriends of the players. And so that takes place, and that's the last chapel that we do. So that's kind of our Sunday routine of home games. And then in addition to that, I do a Tuesday Bible study for the guys on Tuesday home games. Once again, there's 13 Tuesday home games. I do that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then my wife does a Bible study for the wives and the girlfriends on Tuesday evening at about 7 o'clock for a night game. And then outside of that, my responsibilities are to provide chapel at spring training down in Scottsdale for each Sunday of spring training. And then I'm also responsible. So Baseball Chapel, the organization, is responsible to provide chaplains for every, not just major league team, but all of their minor league affiliate teams as well. And so as the major league chaplain, I'm responsible to have chaplains in each of our minor league teams. So in the case of the Giants, our AAA team is in Sacramento, the Sacramento River Cats. Our AA team is in Richmond, Virginia. And then we have 2 single-A teams, one in San Jose, one in Augusta, Georgia. And then we have what's called a single-A short season team up in Salem, Keizer, Oregon. And then we have our rookie league and our fall instructional league, which is down in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I'm responsible to find chaplains for all of those teams and to manage them as well. I should also mention something I didn't mention that is really important. Obviously, as we all know, there are a lot of Latin players in Major League Baseball and minor leagues, and so we also have Spanish chaplains that I oversee in our organization at every level as well. So on Sundays when I go to the ballpark and I'm doing a chapel for our guys at 11:30, our Spanish chaplain is doing a chapel in Spanish for the Latin guys on the team.
Mm-hmm. So when you prepare for your other job at church at Foster City, and you kind of know your congregation, I imagine, after 31 years, you sort of know. What's different about your preparation or your objectives or your hopes or your prayers as you realize the smaller group of people in a very different life circumstance? How do you set this thing up?
Yeah, that's a good question. Gosh, first of all, I'm 61 years old, right? So I'm ministering to young men and women at our chapels, who are in many cases younger than my own kids, in their early 20s even and mid 20s. So I'm aware of that. I'm ministering to a lot of what we call millennials, right? So what I know about millennials obviously has to impact the way that I prepare my messages. I think of them in those terms. One of the things I try not to do is I try not to talk about sports or baseball. The last thing you want to try to do with those guys is try to be relevant by, giving some example, from sports or something. Now, I do try to apply my messages directly at the kinds of challenges that they might have, for sure. But I don't want to pretend like I know what it's like to be a baseball player, or I certainly don't want to start giving examples from my pitiful career or anything like that.
Well, if
so
both your sons are
D1
D1 college coaches, you must have something in your genes.
Well, maybe, but nothing they're all that interested in, to be honest. So
now these guys, as you're preparing for these guys, I'm reminded of kind of the Israelites and God saying to them, when you get to the land of milk and honey, you're going to forget me. And these guys, even the lower paid guys, by a lot of standards, would be living the land of milk and honey. And at least in some ways, the Beatitudes are talking all about the poor and the lost and the broken. And rich guys in the Bible get a hard calling. Harder for a camel in the eye of a needle than a rich man enter the kingdom. How do you incorporate, or what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, you're right about that. It's true. And I have no doubt that the success and the wealth and fame and all that sometimes go along with a professional baseball player's life can be detrimental to their faith and to their following Christ, for sure. So no doubt about that. What I like to say is that either a crisis can create a need in a person, or success can create a need in a person. So for those in a crisis, that's kind of obvious. Maybe their career is falling apart, or maybe their batting average is on the interstate, or whatever it might be, or maybe they get sent down to the minor leagues or whatever, and that sort of crisis can obviously create a sense of need in their lives for something more, and so opportunities abound with that kind of a situation. But I also think success can create a sense of need, because when they finally get what they've always dreamed of, and they realize it really can't deliver what they thought it would deliver,
wow,
then it's like, okay, I need more than this. All this money and all this fame and everything I ever dreamed of, it really isn't living up to what I thought it would. So I've seen guys come to Christ out of success as well as out of crisis.
Do you have, a couple years ago, Mark, I had a chance to go down with a church to Tiger Stadium, and it was on a Sunday, and they were having like an all churches day kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And Frank Tanana spoke, and Torrey Hunter spoke, and I don't remember,
Right.
Brian Dozier, I think the Twins were the visitors that day, and 9,000 people came at 11 o'clock. Does anything like that happen in San Francisco?
Yeah, it sure does. As I said, our general manager is a believer, and so he helps organize, along with some other former players and current players, a thing we call it Fellowship Day at AT&T Park, and so it's a Sunday, and a lot of church groups come and so forth, and then after the game, they all come down on the field, and we have a big concert. Usually, we have a Christian band that's very well known. They'll do kind of a mini concert, and then we'll bring 5 or 6 players, in some cases with their spouses, up on the stage, and we will interview them about their faith. And so, we probably don't get 7,000 or 8,000, but we probably get maybe 3,000 to 5,000
Wow.
that are there for those times. It's great. It's awesome. I mean, people love it, and sometimes it's a big step for the players to do that. I mean, for one, they're taking time. It doesn't sound like a big deal, to stay after a couple hours after a game. But I tell you what, on a Sunday afternoon, when you've been on the road for 2 weeks, and you got an opportunity to spend the late afternoon and evening with your family, and instead you choose to speak at Fellowship Day, it's a big deal. So we appreciate when these guys are willing to do that, and we've had some guys on the Giants that have done a fantastic job for us on Fellowship Day.
Well, kudos to those guys who do that, and who knows? I mean, not just for the kids, because all of us, we're all part of the body. It helps to hear anybody, but for kids too, man. I just love it when I hear those guys, and they'll take the time to do something like that.
Yeah, it's great. It really is great, and for some of them, it's a faith stretching experience too. A lot of these guys, they may be great in front of a crowd swinging a bat, but speaking about your faith, that's something real different.
I remember Torrey Hunter, he started cracking up. He was speaking about his faith, and he got into a story where he realized he'd behaved a little bit badly on the field. And he's sort of self-convicting with every word, and he's laughing.
Yeah, that's great.
But it was real, it was super real.
Yep.
The idea that a chapel, a time of worship and a time of prayer, it's sort of the creative locations. I've done some of these on ski hills before, where there's a guy that'll run a chapel service at the on the mountain, or in an airport there'll be a little chaplain. Or if you look for them, there are places like that. But you're doing it in a very non-traditional space, I guess you might say. What's that like? Pros and cons.
It's interesting, to say the least. One of the things about being a chaplain, I don't care what level it is, major league or single A short season, man, you got to be flexible. You got to be really flexible. You got to be flexible as to where you do chapel. I mean, I've done chapels in bat rooms. Guys do chapels in dugouts. They do chapels in laundry rooms. I mean, you have to be flexible, because different stuff comes up every game. I mean, there's different stuff, whether it's the player's own schedule of batting practice or whatever, or a special team meeting that's being called, or maybe the stadium, maybe there's a special day, maybe it's like, Disney Day or something like that. Right. So they're taking over a room to get ready for that. So you just got to be really, really flexible and kind of roll with the punches. and it's not easy to do. I like to have my ducks in a row, and I like to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and so that's been a challenge for me on a personal level. But it's also probably really good for me.
Pushes everybody outside their
Yeah.
comfort zone a little
Yeah.
bit. I mean, we know and we totally respect, obviously, there's a confidentiality and there's a privacy, but in general terms, do you ever get the guys who linger after you're kind of finished, or do those conversations ever ensue in this environment?
Yes, they do. They really do. And, when I had been with the Giants for about a year and a half, I felt like for some reason I kind of crossed an invisible barrier where all of a sudden there was more trust. And so some of the conversations that have taken place, after chapel where guys kind of linger, want to talk a little bit more have been meaningful. There haven't been a lot of them, but the ones that I've had have been really meaningful. And, like I said, we're really blessed on the Giants to just have some outstanding young men who not only have a sincere faith, but are really living it out and are doing some amazing work in the community, to demonstrate that, and that's really cool to see.
We certainly hear an awful lot of noise about the opposite, and
Yeah.
there's plenty of examples, and it's just stunning when you mention guys like that are leading by example, are living faithfully, and are willing to, be a city on a hill in a way for the gospel.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool, and again, I think it's funny too. I don't know. It's interesting how each sport has a little bit of a different culture, and football, basketball, soccer, baseball. Baseball has its own culture, and I've had to learn that over time. I come from a little bit more of a football background, but I've had to learn baseball culture, and it is really different. It's my impression is that it's a little bit more subdued, a little bit more. We're going to work today. And not that there's not bad stuff that happens. There is in every sport, of course, and there is in every job. But again, I've just been really impressed with the character of our team, and really kind of proud to be associated with it.
That's awesome. I mean, imagine if you were just an absolute wild man, out of control partier. 162 games would kill you in about 1 year.
You know what? It would. It's going to show up real fast. Real fast.
Theology question, and as a pastor, I mean, if people are listening to this podcast, I hope they're sticking with us. Some are interested in baseball, and some are interested in culture, and all of us have some interest in what the gospel is in our world. And from your seat, Mark, what does the gospel have to offer, or what is the truth that it presents to the person who has everything?
Yeah, another good question. One of the things about athletes is athletes are very performance oriented. So there's no grace in sports.
No.
Right? You either perform and succeed,
Wow.
or you don't perform and you fail.
Yeah.
And eventually, as a professional baseball player, you're done.
Right.
There's not a lot of grace. So everything's about your performance. You're constantly comparing yourself. You're constantly achieving and measuring your success. All the analytics in baseball now even make it more so that way. So I think really that the gospel speaks into that in such a powerful way, where if you can begin to convince these guys that God does not have us on a performance basis, and that He welcomes and accepts and loves us even in our sin, and even in our weakness, and that He is a source of unconditional love and affirmation. I tell you what, that is a powerful message to athletes on any level. I know myself, I was driven personally, athletically. It was my God, and the only way I could find value and meaning and a sense that I was worth something was to succeed athletically. And, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I don't care how good you are, eventually your career is going to be over, and you're probably going to be about 33 years old.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do? You're going to play golf the rest of your life? So I think that the message of the gospel and of the unconditional love of Christ, and I love talking about how when Jesus was baptized, the Holy Spirit fell and the Father spoke, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." And Jesus had never performed a miracle as far as we know at that point, never preached a sermon. He hadn't done anything, and yet the Father was well pleased with him, and that was the fuel, if you will, out of which he ministered for the next 3.5 years. And I think that, for guys just to realize that, hey, in Christ, you are beloved. You are his beloved child. He loves you. That's a powerful message for guys that are so used to being on a performance treadmill in everything they do.
Do you believe that the gospel of Christianity is unique in that aspect in world religions about, instead of having to ascribe and aspire to, self-actualize?
Yeah. You know what? I'm not a huge student of world religions. I've done a little bit of studying on that in seminary and so forth, but I've heard that is true, that this unconditional love and this the riches of his grace, as Paul calls it in Ephesians, is unique to the Christian faith.
Yeah, it's not our performance. It's not our great works. It's the cross. It's terrific to hear you talk, man. And for what it's worth, we bless you in your work at the church and with the Giants. And thank you for putting the effort and the energy into it. And we believe it's worth it. We believe that you're planting seeds of the gospel, and they will return. They will always return somewhere, some way down the line if you're preaching the word. I do have to ask you in closing, because apparently, if you've been there 3 years, You were there for the Giants' last World Series, is that correct?
No, I was not. No, I was not. I came the year after they won the World Series.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't you that made Madison Bumgarner unworldly fantastic in that World Series?
Oh, my gosh. Unbelievable. Yeah, he was fantastic. I love that guy. But no, our former chaplain was privileged to be a part of 3 World Series.
Oh, brother.
I don't know. Maybe after last year, it was such a tough year. Maybe they thought about firing me. I don't know, but they have kept me on, so I'm coming back for a 4th year. Thank the Lord and thank the Giants.
Well, everyone in Kansas City believes Baumgartner had
heavenly. I don't have any
health.
question that they're they're going to be a lot better next year.
Next year is always when we're all going to be better.
Yep.
Absolutely. But it's been a fantastic run for that team. Maybe not last year, but the last decade for sure. And the performance of Baumgartner with the 3 wins in the World Series was one I will never forget. And
unreal.
Just assumed he had help from above or something. It was everyone in Kansas City believes that, I think. So
I can tell you that he did.
That's great. And I happened to listen. I'm way out here in Michigan, but I happened to see the Giants on opening day this year. He hit 2 home runs.
I know. Isn't that great?
What is
that
up?
guy can hit, man.
This guy
awesome.
is Superman.
I know. He's just a big country boy.
Wow. Well, bless you, Mark. Thank you for this time today. I know you had 100 other things to do. And
hey, thank you.
We appreciate
great to spend some time with you guys, and appreciate you listening.
Well, thank you. Bless you, and thank you all for listening to the No Shame Podcast.
Got no shame.